know what's some overrated bullshit? Story choices in video games. That's not to say every game that offers the player story choices is some absolute dog shit, useless extra which should be ignored. I'm just saying for a lot of them, it doesn't really add much. Um, for example, one of the most sort of big deal ones was Mass Effect, and I saw everyone scream their heads off about Mass Effect 3's lack of choice when it came to do ending, but my problem with that is that's always kind of been the case with the series as a whole. People love to show these fake like images suggesting there's this massive branch of possibilities that the story can go down, but there really isn't. Mass Effect 1, I played one time being as good as possible, one time being as evil as possible. Both kind of resulted in the same thing. Even the romances seem more triggered by just talking to characters enough than any of my actual choices. I don't know if there are some things you can say to knock them off. I was a complete dick to Liara as much as I could on my evil run through, and I still fucked her at the end, so I don't see how it had that big an effect. And the story itself was still mostly the same, just with some minor tweaks here and there. Maybe a couple of extra optional side missions. But in the end, it just doesn't add to much. And really, the player, if you were to just give the player a button, do you want to be good or do you want to be evil? I think the majority of players would probably get a fairly similar experience if that was how it worked. And part of that's because most of the time these titles actually encourage the players to just pick one extreme and stick to it. Besides Mass Effect, Infamous also has a similar system where additional perks and extras and unlockables are only there for players who pick one extreme and go all the way to it. So it there's not really much choice. Ideally, you want to stick to your side. Now, that's one thing, but let's talk about another issue I have. And that's the simple fact that I think even when it's not good or evil, they often can have sort of negative effects when it comes to characterization. Now, this is moving away from RPGs, and I want to make it clear while Telltale and David Cage and Supermassive and all those sort of games have their issues with choices maybe not being the most incredible branching storyline altering things out there, I do think they do a good job in that they often give players a selection of things they can do that aren't clearly sided to good or evil, even if the majority of the times they don't actually change the games that much, particularly in Telltale's case, which is probably the worst offender. Like, seriously, you've got to consider with Telltale that this very clear seasonal focus of running storylines goes blatantly against the whole idea of having choices which actually have permanent effects because they really can't branch out that much. It's like when a character can die in Walking Dead, you know they will die in Walking Dead, or they'll be written out because there's no way the studio is gonna write completely different episodes for like ages just because of one character which they're given an option for them to live instead of die. They're gonna die off next episode or they're gonna be written out in some way. But that's not so much of a big deal. I think these things are fairly inoffensive because that's kind of the whole gimmick. What I want to talk about now is games which are focused very heavily on narrative but also on gameplay, and the main gimmick isn't your ability to make choices. By this I mean stuff like Grand Theft Auto 4, Grand Theft Auto 5, or for example the recent Sony game Horizon Zero Dawn and Ghost of Tsushima, all of which I think have a negative effect due to their inclusion of choices. Here's what I mean. So, Horizon Zero Dawn, its choices barely amount to anything, but there's a lot of points where you can basically decide, do you want Aloy to be smart, charming, or like angry or something? It'll give you 3 different dialogue things, and all these do is make a sort of already kind of boring character more boring, because I have no idea who Aloy is. Aloy, the choices don't really give you enough to really shape Aloy into a character that feels sort of like yours. And to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily want that because I've never seen a game actually really achieve it to the point where I really feel like I've made a character who was fun. It always feels like I have to do a lot of head work to actually run on the idea that I've actually created my own super unique, compelling character. That just doesn't happen. There's a reason I think there's a to quote the infamous movie Bob, there's a reason no one won a Pulitzer for a fucking choose your own adventure novel. it's just kind of antithetical to the idea of creating a strong character to throw in a lot of choices. So let me talk about Grand Theft Auto 4, because for the most part, I think Nico is a really good character. But bluntly put, the choices in that game suck ass and take away from that in some degree. Let's talk about GTA's choices. Well, first of all, every now and again you'll get a choice to murder someone or not murder someone. Nearly always, I'll choose not to. The game has very clearly enforced that the best way to play is not to murder people when given the option, because often that will lock off certain content, like some extra missions and bits and pieces, if you choose not to murder people at certain points. So I don't do it. Now, the player can be a fucking psychopath and fuck and kill everything in that world. You know, in obviously the fuck first, then kill. There's no necrophilia options in GTA 4, I have to make clear. But the point is, you know, this isn't really reflecting on the player's choices. It's just that the player has been enforced to the idea that if they're given an option to spare someone, they often get some extra mission down the line. Similarly, you've got this point where you're given a choice between two characters. One's Playboy X, one's Durain. You can choose to kill Playboy or you can choose to kill Durain. Now, Playboy's clearly the asshole character you want to kill. And what happens when you kill Durain? You get a bit of cash, which is fairly pointless because cash really doesn't do much in GTA 4. You kill Playboy X, on the other hand, the clear good choice, I'd say. You get access to a house, some clothes, additional story content with Dwayne. You get this exclusive function where you can call in heavies to help you out. A ton of cool extra stuff rather than some useless money. But it goes further. A big part of GTA 4's core conflict is the question of, like, Nico wants to find this guy and get revenge. Spoilers for an old game, but, you know, Nico is after his revenge. Problem is, this revenge is something the player really has no investment in. They might be invested in Nico, but they don't really care about, you know, all the names of the friends Nico lost because they never fucking meet them. So when you finally, after killing so many people and doing so many odd jobs, get your chance to have your revenge, it becomes a player choice. Do you kill Darko Breivik or do you let him live? Now, I think this would have been a compelling choice for Nico, not for the player. If Nico gunned Darko down, it would be a fairly dark moment because it would kind of be, well, he killed this guy who at this point was no threat to him. You know, he kind of, you know, it was a petty act to just fuck someone over who maybe sort of deserved it, but at the same time was already in a pretty shitty place. On the other hand, had Nico not killed Darko Breivik, it would be this big thing where it's like, well, after all that, after all the people Nico's killed, after all the chaos he's been through, after all these years, he, like, decides it's, you know, it's not worth doing. There's no point to it. Both would be strong character moments. When it's put in the player's hand, it's not, because it's kind of a Schrodinger's cat. Like, I don't want to know what I'd do. I want to know what Nico would do. And that's kind of been robbed from me. I don't think Ghost of Tsushima had a particularly interesting story or cast, but that ending was when I just stood up and said, like, okay, fuck this. Having the whole core conflict be, is Jin, like, the ghost or is he the samurai? And having it end with, well, you choose. Do you murder this guy or do you not? And that's the only story choice you actually get, which affects the plot. I mean, by affects the plot, I mean it affects like the 2 minutes after, before the credits roll. And to me, I'm like, you know, this will be a chance for Jin to be a somewhat interesting character. Now that's gone because it's just up to me. And I'm like, I don't care about Jin. I don't care about his fucking mentor character. This has just kind of been like, oh, fuck it, I'll let him live. Because I've played these games. I know doing the good thing nearly always gets you extra content, so I'm incentivized. Even if I really hated someone and I thought it would be much better to kill them off, that part of my brain would be like, I know how Red Dead Redemption 2 works. I know if I do good, I get a much more satisfying send-off to Arthur Morgan. There's like 10 extra missions, which are exclusively for the redemption part of the redemption in the name of the fucking game. Or I could just, choose evil and cut off a chunk of the game and have a narrative which didn't really make that much thematic sense, I guess. So this doesn't really do it. It just feels like a waste of resources. And in the worst cases, it feels like it takes away from what could have been interesting characters. I don't want my own version of fucking Aloy from Horizon. I want to know what Aloy does, because none of the choices do interesting things to the game. So there's no reason for me to want to make them. Same can be said for GTA 4, and same can be said for Ghost of Tsushima. And GTA 5 is like the most extreme example, because holy shit, it just basically throws a menu at the player and says, do you want 2 bad endings or 1 good ending? And everyone obviously picks the good ending most of the time, unless they really hate one of the 2 main characters, in which case I think that's kind of a failure. That's not a good thing if people are picking to kill off one of your main characters, because at that point they likely just don't like the character and don't want to play as them, and are like, I want to just knock this guy off so I don't have to fucking listen to him anymore, which isn't really a good sign. Do I have anything else to say? Well, I think I do. I'm trying to think of where to go on, because I feel I've nailed my point pretty hard. I'm not making this strict thing where saying nothing should do choices. I'm just saying it's grossly overrated. No, I don't think a character should represent the player. That's some fucking bullshit. I've never felt like, even with choice-heavy games, that a character was me, quote unquote, and they should do what I would do. That's completely not to my interest. Characters I felt weirdly close to emotionally. I don't know, Shinada from Yakuza 5, and I never remember thinking that much about that had choices, but they're all tongue in cheek. I certainly never got some dramatic Shinada moment where I get to sort of affect his whole make a massive change to his characterization, because I wouldn't want that, because that goes against the idea of a strong character. So yeah, that's kind of my point. Yeah, they kind of are kind of stupid. I don't really see why so many games do them. It feels like a waste of resources. If you've played most, the good route usually gets you better content, which is why so many people go for the good route first, and evil playthroughs are like some extra for most people. A lot of the time, they're sort of, and when it's not that stuff, it's interesting when you have something like Fallout New Vegas. I mean, crazy overrated as I think it is, I will give it props for its actual, the way it's set out its will does mean your choices are less about good or evil and more who you think is the better faction to side with for the fate of the wastes, which is something cool, I guess. But as a whole, most of the games which do it, I just think it's, why bother? And in the worst cases, I think it's actively detrimental to good storytelling and good characterization. You don't need a player to be represented by the main character. I'd rather have a strong main character.